During the course of the 2019 Canadian election, strange articles began to appear in an online publication called the Buffalo Chronicle that targeted incumbent Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his governing Liberal Party. The most salacious story was a false accusation that Mr. Trudeau left his job teaching in 2001 as a result of a sex scandal at the school where he worked, and paid off his accuser to cover it up. Despite the almost immediate debunking of this claim, the Buffalo Chronicle doubled down on the conspiracy, this time alleging that Facebook was being strong-armed by the Trudeau campaign to censor the story. Debunkers found that the stories and the Buffalo Chronicle itself were the product of one person, one Matthew Ricciazzi, who generated the stories just across the border from Canada in Buffalo, New York. His motive was profit, not politics, as, according to BuzzFeed News, he had a history of offering to write politically skewed articles in exchange for cash. Despite the stories having been seen by an estimated 100,000 people, investigators found the articles had a negligible effect, if any, on the outcome of the election. But is it foreign interference? Similarly, but on a much larger scale, the same thing happened a few years earlier in the 2016 election in the United States, driven in no small part through troll farms operated on behalf of the Russian government through the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, in St. Petersburg, Russia. The IRA's campaign was much more sophisticated and ongoing, which included posing online as UN election volunteers to gain inside information onto how to target American voters, with 2 IRA staffers even traveling to the United States to gain first-hand knowledge. It was these staffers who discovered that the best option was to target the so-called purple states, the ones where there may be a preference for one party over another but with significant second-party support, as these would have the tightest races. In addition, the IRA created a series of pages with mostly conservative or far-right themes that disseminated content meant to influence particular groups. There was content related to separatist movements, the Second Amendment on the right to bear arms, Blue Lives Matter, and against refugees, among many other topics. For the Russian government, its goal was to promote the candidacy of Republican Donald Trump and sow discontent and suspicion on democratic and electoral processes. As a side note, some credence was lent to the IRA's involvement in foreign influence campaigns when researchers noticed that troll activity noticeably decreased on Russian national holidays and when the weather was cold in St. Petersburg. It's an interesting article, and I'll link to it and some other articles I've used as sources in the description. So did these efforts have an effect? It is really difficult to say. There are factors such as the electoral college system, traditional voter behavior, campaign strategies, and other influences that make it very difficult to isolate the precise impact of Russian interference on the election. While some argue that Russia's actions may have influenced public opinion and contributed to the current climate of distrust and polarization, others believe that the influence was marginal compared to the other, more legitimate factors I previously mentioned. So is it foreign interference? Both examples could be considered foreign meddling in important internal processes, but does it reach the threshold where it could be considered damaging? And who makes that call? And will responding to these potential threats solve the problem or backfire, resulting in foreign interests advancing their agendas despite steps to counter them? We will discuss these questions and more in this episode of Detoxifying Digital. Foreign interference in an election or the workings of a targeted institution reach the threshold of what's called an internationally wrongful act when 2 elements are present. The first is that the action must be legally attributable to a state, meaning that the evidence must substantiate the participation of the state being accused of interference, either directly or through a non-state actor that is acting under the instructions of or under the direction or control of the state. This, for example, is the legal basis for attributing the Internet Research Agency's 2016 operations to Russia. The second element is that the action has to be determined to have violated a duty under international law. These 2 elements open a Pandora's box of issues, such as those related to sovereignty and the rules of war that are far beyond the scope of this video, but we may explore them in the future. Let me know in the comments if you would like us to do videos on these topics. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. We really appreciate your support, and if you could give this video a like, it helps us tremendously. And if you found this video valuable and want to be informed when a new one is released, please click on the subscribe button and ding the notification bell. Now back to the video. But let's take a step back and recognize that there are legitimate forms of foreign government communications, such as public or digital diplomacy initiatives for one, and even communications to diaspora groups, which often provide important information to migrant groups to their home countries. An example of this is the outreach efforts made by the Lebanese government following the Beirut port explosion in August 2020. The explosion, which devastated parts of Beirut and resulted in significant loss of life, injured thousands and displaced many others, and prompted the Lebanese government to reach out to its diaspora for support and assistance. Lebanon has a large diaspora population, particularly in countries such as the United States, Canada, Australia, and across Europe. Lebanese embassies and consulates, along with diaspora organizations and community groups, work together to mobilize support, raise funds for relief efforts, and provide information to diaspora members about ways to help those affected. But there are also malevolent uses of this type of communication and engagement and may contribute to a fracturing in relations between a diaspora group and their new country. For example, China is noted for its strong hold on Chinese expats in other countries, either through their influence on local Chinese media, subtle coercion via families back home, among other methods. One method involving Chinese students during the Canadian election in 2019 was identified as part of the findings of the Canadian Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference in Federal Electoral Processes and Democratic Institutions that was released in May 2024. Among other things, the inquiry heard testimony that the groups of Chinese students were bused into a constituency called a riding in Canada in the Toronto area to support the nomination of a particular candidate, with allegations that a proxy from the Chinese government provided them with documents allowing them to vote, despite them not living in the riding. The intelligence that was provided to the inquiry indicated that the Chinese consulate issued veiled threats regarding their student visas and/or implied consequences for their families back home if they did not participate. The inquiry and the political party in question found that the meddling in the nomination had no effect on its outcome, but still the threat is there. While the operation seemed relatively small, it was likely meant to be small enough as to not meet the threshold for official reaction. While the examples in this video seem small and fairly petty compared to large-scale interference, such as arming rebel groups in a foreign country to provoke a coup d'etat, thereby making the rebel group beholden to them if they reach power, the argument is that foreign interference campaigns have different objectives, albeit with the ultimate goal of advancing their own interests. The goal of small campaigns is that they will not raise the same alarm as larger ones, thereby keeping the operation contained and ongoing. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies may investigate and deal with any threats or offenses that arise out of these operations, but they may not rise to the level where they will have to be dealt with diplomatically. Larger-scale operations, such as the one described in the United States in 2016, did not go away, and the US is far from the only country that Russia targets, and Russia is not the only country engaging in these activities. These operations seem to be playing a long game, disrupting electoral processes and undermining democratic institutions. Thereby polarizing citizens and undermining confidence in these institutions may not work in the long term, but years and even decades-long efforts of continual assault may start to have the effect of destabilizing democracies and undermining rule of law, which itself would take years or decades to undo, and provide the adversarial state the opportunity to assert its interests. The good news is, for the time being, democratic institutions have withstood attempts of foreign interference at various levels to accomplish these goals. Social media companies are also getting better at identifying malicious content that form the digital or cyber part of these operations, with some platforms even creating a registry of media outlets that they will allow on their platforms during an election period. How this will work is still to be determined. I'm doing some research into this and will form part of a future video as well. And it is important to note that the methods and threats for foreign interference are evolving. The issues discussed in this video may be irrelevant a year or so from now, such as the case with artificial intelligence and its ability to develop disinformation at scale. This new actor in international relations is a game changer and will only grow in prominence. For now, it feels like the ball is in the court of law and policymakers to work with all the stakeholders involved to develop long-term solutions that will protect our democratic institutions and keep every citizen safe from malign foreign interference. Such efforts are underway in many countries, but they're still trying to understand the problem. So much of it is new and also transnational. No country exists in a bubble anymore. The problem is understood. The future will tell us if we made the right choices to address it.